The essence of Kanban system explains how Taiichi Ohno went about implementing the concepts of flow with great fervor and enthusiasm. The Kanban system has been explained and talked about many places, but in its very simple terms or explanation, it is a method which limits the inventory between two workstations. What it does is it specifies the number of containers that can be present between two workstations and the number of components in these containers. And what this container holds is written on a piece of card. So the card says this is the item code and the quantity of that item code that is present in the container. This card is a single page card with only this data on top. And this card is called Kanban in Japanese. How this system works is, whenever the container, and this container is just like container which is used everywhere in every industry. So when this container gets picked up to be processed on by the work center downstream, the card does not travel with it. The card gets sent to the work center upstream. This card has the item code and the quantity that was present in the container. So what it is telling the work center upstream is, please produce this item code for this quantity. Why this quantity? Because that quantity has been removed from the allocated inventory level and been consumed by the center, been consumed by the machining center downstream. Go back to the supermarket example. On the retail shelf, there was 5 items. 2 were sold. So the order was sent backstage to replenish 2. The same thing is being done here in Kanban system. When this container gets moved or gets consumed by downstream, the card is sent to the previous stage to produce that item code and that much quantity. So it is telling the previous station what to produce and how much to produce. But most importantly, it is telling the previous stage what not to produce. No Kanban, no production. This is the great part of Kanban. While telling you what needs to be produced, it's also telling you what not to produce. So if there is no Kanban card, please don't produce. So this is how the Kanban mechanism was used to limit overproduction. In comparison to Ford system, where there was no space to keep your production, you stop producing. Here, what Taiichi Ohno did was, if the allocated inventory levels were achieved, you stop production. But the Kanban card also told you what to produce next. So if you have 2 Kanban cards, because 2 different components got consumed downstream, you had to sequence and produce only those two components. Mind you, since there is a variety of items to be produced by the same work center, you are forcing the center to do setup change. Setup change was not the criteria in Ford's assembly line system because the variety was not there. Taiichi Ohno is developing a system where he is trying to improve the flow, but one of the biggest driving factors in trying to improve flow is to stop overproduction. This overproduction Taiichi Ohno is trying to control by limiting inventory. And this Kanban system is what is helping him apply the second concept. In other words, by understanding this, you see Taiichi Ohno is trying to implement the most important and the toughest part of the flow concept in his environment. His environment means low volume, high variety. So through Kanban, he is forcing the other work center also to stop overproduction and when to do setup change. This more than convinces us that Toyota Production System also exhibits the application of the same concept of flow which Henry Ford had developed. So Kanban system is a practical mechanism to limit overproduction. In trying to implement Kanban, Ohno expanded the Ford's mechanism from space to inventory. But in trying to adhere to concepts of flow, we have to abolish local efficiencies. And this is where Ohno had to fight hard and fight long. Whenever we are making many models, a machining center which was not dedicated had to produce multiple components. When you talk about multiple components, it is inherent in the assumption there is going to be a setup change. And setup change means loss of throughput. The numbers go down. Now comes the concept that how to abolish local efficiencies. Kanban was also used to focus on where to abolish local efficiencies first. Now Kanban by its very definition is now impacting throughput, because first we have said that please produce only what the Kanban is telling you. That means we are forcing setup change on the machines. If the card is come, you have to produce it. Now in trying to produce this new order, a setup change is done, and that setup change may actually force the throughput to go down. So when we are trying to find out where is the stoppage to flow coming, we again use the intrinsic part of Kanban system to focus. You start reducing the quantity of containers and then further go on reducing the number of components within the container. Why are we doing this? We are doing this to increase flow. How is flow going up? Since the inventory is less waiting between two stations, the flow has gone up. The waiting time is gone down for the inventory. So as we try to reduce the inventory between two stations, we are exposing ourselves to disruptions. And this is the place where to focus. Any disruptions to flow is the place to focus. What Taiichi Ohno kept trying was to make sure that this inventory present between two stations under the Kanban system was constantly decreased. But in trying to do that, you are forcing multiple setup changes on equipments which are not dedicated or which have to produce multiple components. And in trying to do that, you are fighting a Herculean task of setup changes. Before Taiichi Ohno proved it that setup change is not as important, the concept or the way most of the people handled setup changes was through economical lot size, EOQs. The reason why EOQs were born was the fact that we knew that the setup change is a must. Now, since it's a must and it's a necessary evil, to reduce the impact of setup change, we decided what would be a lot size which would negate or reduce the negative impact of setup change. And the negative impact of setup change was considered as loss of throughput for the station. Now Taiichi Ohno on one hand is trying to reduce this lot size, because reduction of lot size increases the flow of material through the system. But when he reduces the lot size and the Kanban system sends the cart back for production, it is forcing setup changes. Mind you, when you are forcing such setup changes, it is but natural that there were many times where the setup time was much more than the time required to produce the lot. How can you fight this fight? Because every person in charge of the work center knows that when he is not producing, his efficiencies are going down. And here a concept is being implemented which says that please do setup changes and produce this quantity. And the production time for that quantity was much less than the time spent on setup change. This is where Taiichi Ohno took on the world knowledge existing at that point in time. Thousands and thousands of articles are written on the economic lot size and how setup cost money. But mind you, he did not let go, and he said, if I have to increase my flow, we have to do setup changes. And as the quantities kept going down, the disruptions to flow came up. And this disruption to flows was where attack was made.